Excited to introduce our presenters today. Many of you are very comfortable with your colleagues, and I'm very much looking forward to the presentation that Dr. Richmond and Dr. Neville have for us today. They wanted me to make sure that everyone was aware of that this is an introduction to UDL, and I've learned quite a bit myself just over the last couple of weeks, learning a little bit more and doing my own research. So you're in for a real treat today. We will post the link to this webinar a little bit later on today, so you will have access to go back and look at some of the additional information and the links later on. So without further ado.
Well, we are just so delighted to be here, and feel so honored that many of you came. I know some of you were forced to come. But those of you that came to see what it is that we're talking about here. And so as Layla and I present this to you, what we want to really show you is that UDL is really built on the stuff that you already know. That there's not a lot of, there's some extensions and new things that are going on because of technology. But it's basically a lot of stuff that we've been doing over the years and we used to call differentiated instruction. So we're going to show you how that ties together and how those two work so closely together. So the objectives we have, Once Upon a Mind was what we thought we would title this, because UDL mind. So we kind of have a play on this word mind as you go threaded throughout the presentation. So when we talk about the objectives and we want to frame your mind, this is the part of UDL where we're going to tell you why you have to do this because of policy and because of law. Because essentially we're all going to be forced to teach using UDL, and so that's what we're going to give you some information on that. But then when we talk about practicing mind over matter, we all know that there's some things that we have to do, but the real reason we do them is the human element. And so when we're teaching, and this law comes along and says, you must demonstrate that UDL is implemented in instruction. Well, that's one thing, but what we really know that we want to use it is because it helps kids, and it helps us become better teachers. So as we're talking about teaching linked with learning, teaching and learning, because we don't really teach until somebody learns, right? UDL is the way in which we now know because of technology, is that when somebody learns something, if we had a camera into their brain, we'd see those neurons firing. So UDL is telling us how we're doing that and the proof of the teaching and learning going in. So then we say we want you to clear your mind. We want you to take away, well, first of all, many of us multitask. So is it possible to sit here and focus just on one thing and not think about all the other things you're doing? So clearing your mind, yeah. But also of the clearing your mind of the yeah buts. Maybe clearing your mind of, as from a teacher's standpoint, can I really teach this child, this challenging child in my classroom, this content, or is it too far over their head? And clearing your mind of the thoughts if you're a student of, I can't do this stuff, it's too hard. So with UDL, I mean, it's not the magic bullet, but in many cases it is. Enables us to become better teachers and obviously students to learn more. And then obtaining peace of mind, because that's the application phase of UDL. That's where we become most efficient when, as both teachers and learners, when we now have this toolbox that we can go into, and it has more strategies in it than we've had before to be able to reach those kids in the classroom. So this is really like a two-pronged presentation that we're talking about, because we're talking about how to embed UDL in our classrooms as college professors in order to reach the students that we're training, the future teachers. And we're also talking about teaching this to the students so they can come out and go into the classrooms and implement it in the classrooms. So it's like anything else. We want to model the UDL practices because it's good teaching techniques and our students will learn better. But we also want to model it because we want them to see it so they can go and model it. Because this is new. This isn't what, for our teachers in training, this isn't what they necessarily experienced in their classroom to some regard. So that's why that makes that so important.
So we're going to start by, you can't talk about universal design for learning without starting by looking at universal design, which is where we got our origins from. I'll move the cameras there now. So look at that. What do you think when you see that staircase?
Handicap accessible.
Accessible, great. It's beautiful, thank you. Any other thoughts?
Asher.
I'm sorry?
Escher.
Oh, Escher, yes, so thinking about, it has a connection for you. All of those things, this is what universal design in architecture is, and that's where, again, UDL, Universal Design for Learning, came from. It's about creating things from the onset. Ron Mace, back in the 70s, developed the concept of universal design in architecture. And he actually did it because of a personal passion. Ron Mace was diagnosed with polio at a young age and was not able, his mother actually had to move to college with him and live in a mobile home that they moved over to the institution parking lot, so to speak, so that he could attend college. He couldn't get internships, and it wasn't because he wasn't fully capable mentally, it was because there were accessibility issues. And so he spent his life then ensuring that others would have access. And his principles of universal design is it's much more appealing, it's much more functional, it actually is more cost efficient to do this from the beginning, to do it up front, as opposed to going back and retrofitting and making those adjustments after the fact. And his big piece with universal design, though, is that it's accessible to everyone. Regardless of disability, people can have access to the things that they need, that everyone can have the same amount of access to the buildings and such. So it's a great diagram of what universal design meant. And then the next slide.
And the analogy being that UDL would provide access to the curriculum for all students.
And so that's where we make that transfer then into, and this cartoon, you may not be able to see it there, but the child in the wheelchair is saying, could you please shovel the ramp? He wants to get into school. And the gentleman says, all these other kids are waiting to use the stairs. When I get through shoveling them, then I'll clear the ramp for you. And the child says, but if you shovel the ramp, we can all get in. That's the heart of universal design and the transition into universal design for learning. If we shovel the ramp, if we create curriculum that is accessible to the widest range of users, and do it up front, we don't have to do those after the fact retrofits with accommodations that we would, not to say that accommodations aren't important, but if we do universal design for learning up front, the need for accommodations is significantly reduced because now that material is accessible from the very beginning. We don't have to retrofit, put a ramp on the side of the building, or wait till we do the stairs first. We can do it and meet everybody's needs at the same time. The fun stuff. And I see a lot of my students, you guys already had this, so you're going to be experts by the time we're done. But there is national policy around UDL. UDL's Universal Design for Learning is not new. It's been around for a while. PAST has been doing work with it since the 90s. In 2008, though, the Higher Education Opportunity Act formally defined universal design for learning, and that definition has been used in multiple arenas since then because it was a very powerful definition. So I'm actually going to share it with you real quickly. They defined the Higher Education Opportunity Act of 2008 defined universal design for learning as a scientifically valid framework for guiding educational practice. So it's a framework we can use using our own content and curriculum. It's just a framework to use for that. That A, provides flexibility in the ways that information is presented, in the way students respond or demonstrate knowledge and skills, and in the way students are engaged. I'm going to talk about that more as we move through the presentation. And B, it reduces barriers in instruction, provides appropriate accommodations, supports, and challenges, and maintains high achievement expectations for all students, including students with disabilities and students who are limited English proficient. And so that's the definition from that act in 2008 that has now been perpetuated in the National Education Technology Plan, in the UDL task force. There was a task force of over 30 organizations that put forward a request to the Elementary and Secondary Education Act Reauthorization Committee saying Higher Education Opportunity Act has already spoken about the importance of universal design for learning. And it's great, and we're making some forward momentum. But if you don't put it into the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, it's not going to keep traction. It's not going to keep moving in the right direction. So we have to have an alignment in what we're doing in higher ed, in our K-12 classrooms and so on. And so they really have pleaded in their case for why that needs to be involved there. And UDL is all over the National Education Technology Plan. The letter put out by Arnie Duncan the forward for the plans specifically notes universal design for learning. Because the technology that our kids have access to in their daily lives is a great example of universal design. But we don't necessarily capitalize on that technology and those constructs in the classroom that we're working with these kids in. So heavy national policy around universal design for learning, and it will, all of what's important too is that all of these, as they talk about it and they suggest it, they also have tied it to any kind of funding. So if you want to get grants around teacher preparation, if you want to get grants around national educational technology plans and technology integration grants and such, you have to start thinking within the realm of universal design for learning because they've connected those grant proposals with UDL. So then we move to the state of Maryland, which Maryland is actually really far ahead of most any states that I know of as far as working with universal design for learning. In May of 2010, the Governor O'Malley assigned a task force to really look at universal design for learning. And their task was to do some research. They did a lit review, they interviewed individuals and professionals in the field, and then to think about the feasibility of actually making it a mandated construct or framework to use for Maryland schools. And in doing so, they authored a fantastic report, which we are getting into now. I'm not sure what piece of it with you. But within this report, they made recommendations. One of the highlights I thought, and one of the things that stuck out for me is this. Universal Design for Learning is not a special education initiative. We are special educators, but it's not a special education initiative. It is a general education initiative. It is for all learners, all students, all teachers to be thinking of. It is a philosophical shift in our thinking about teaching and learning that requires knowledge and cooperation at all organizational levels and among all subjects and fields. UDL supports the learning of all students of all ages, including students who are gifted and talented, English language learners, and students who learn differently with or without disabilities. And so given the diversity in our classrooms, UDL is a perfect fit for what we're trying to do. And this at all organizational levels, the report went on to outline responsibilities of MSDE, the Maryland State Department of Education, of institutions of higher education, of teacher preparation programs, of K-12 schools. So they did a nice job of really talking about if this is really going to work, what role do we all play? And so I recommend, there's a handout that has a link to the Root for All Learners, which is the name of the report that MSDE put out. It was too many pages to print, but it's a great resource. It will give you everything you need to know about universal design for learning, so please take a look at it. But I think a key for us in higher education too is to note that we are just as responsible for implementing universal design for learning as the K-12 classroom. It's about access of all students to all education. So we're going to talk about how UDL looks like in the K-12 classroom, and then, like Betsy said, we'll talk about what does it look like in the college classroom as well. And then from the work done, the Department of Education, MSDE, funded a site called Maryland Learning Links. If you haven't been to this site, and I think I put that site on your resource list as well, it is a phenomenal site that really breaks across all issues of education. But if you go to Teaching All Students, you'll see there is a Universal Design for Learning section. It has resources. It has a module, an interactive gaming module that can help people understand and grasp the concept of Universal Design for Learning. So it allows you to kind of interact and play with it a little bit. It will talk about assistive technology, which is a component of Universal Design for Learning. So there are a lot of great resources here on all kinds of things, positive behavior supports, differentiated instruction. So a great offshoot of the work done by the committee. Anything else on learning links? No, you're good. No, you were good. You're good. And then the last piece is COMAR, which I'm not going to read all of it to you, but it was a document that went out from the interim superintendent of schools on March 27th, 2012, and the subject is Universal Design for Learning. I'm going to skip to the last part. Beginning with the 2014-2015 school year, local school system superintendents shall certify in writing to the state superintendent of schools that universal design for learning principles and guidelines consistent with regulation .03 of this chapter are used for ongoing curriculum development, and then certification will be required every 3 years thereafter. What that's saying is it is now written into the Comar law that districts have to use universal design for learning when developing curriculum. It makes sense because they've already started using universal design for learning in the development of the new assessments that are going to be released in 2014, 2015, I believe. So the move now, the panel made recommendations. Now the state is saying we're going to stand by them and we're going to have some accountability attached to those recommendations. So school districts will have to determine how they're going to use universal design for learning and hold their teachers accountable for that.
So that's the must part, why you must do it. But then we get into again, the human element of why we want to do it because it works. And I think like as teachers, it's in our DNA to find the strength in students. I mean, isn't that what we're all about? You know, students come to us and they might be the smartest literature student, but then they walk into maybe a math class and they think, oh, I'm not good at math. And that's nonsense. Maybe they're not the best mathematician in the world, but they're good at, if they will read from us whether or not we believe that they're good at math. And that's our job to do that, to let them know that. So getting into that mindset, I love Stephen Covey. Any of you that know 7 Habits of Highly Effective People will recognize the circle of concern and the circle of influence. But again, I use this when I teach with my students to say that what Covey says about this is if you have concerns about something, you take everything you're concerned about and you put it in the circle, this great big circle of concern. So if we're talking about school and teaching in a classroom, there might be concerns about, the number of kids in your class. There might be concerns about systemic things that you're hearing coming down the pike. There may be changes. There might be concerns about the curriculum. There might be all types of concerns. The fact that your students don't get breakfast in the morning, or they're not getting enough sleep, or whatever's going on in their home life, all types of things like that. But what Covey would say is take all those concerns and take the ones that you have direct control over and put that within your circle of influence. So for the teacher, it's within the walls of your classroom. What is it that you control? So it really empowers you then to forget about the other stuff because you can't do anything about it anyhow. And then really focus on the stuff that you have control over. And in the classroom, it's the climate of the classroom. It's the acceptance. It's the respect. It's the culture where every kid is going to believe that they can learn because you're there, you're the teacher, and you're telling them they can. And again, as I say all this, as the instructional leader of the classroom then, you might believe it, but then you say, oh my God, now how do I do it? So what we're going to do is then look at UDL and say, this is more tools for your toolbox to reach those kids in ways that we couldn't do that before. Going to the frame, the only thing about the picture frame is just, again, more empowerment to say that, you know what, you really frame the situation. And it's however you think it's going to be, it's how it is. So as a teacher, again, you're framing that I can do this kind of philosophy, then you'll believe in yourself and do it. And you want to get the child, the student, to frame that I can learn this, I know how to do this isn't too hard, this is a piece of cake kind of attitude. And it's going to be, as the person standing there in front of these students, whether, again, I'm going to keep saying, whether it's pre-K-12 students or whether it's university students, it really isn't any difference. They're going to read and reflect what they're seeing coming off of you. So that's where I see UDL as very empowering because, again, it gives me ways to reach students that maybe I didn't have before and make me believe in myself as a teacher and let them believe in themselves as learners. And you're going to hear that threaded throughout the whole day.
Well, if you think about how we frame our thinking about universal design for buildings and access, do you ever get to a place that doesn't have accessible ramps, or doesn't it bother you when you see, well, we wouldn't think of designing a building that doesn't have that access because we've reframed the way we think about architecture and access to buildings. We just have to get there with education too.
Well, and since they made the new CLA building and I cut through it every day, I mean, I don't know how many times I have all this stuff in my hands and I go to the automatic door opener with my elbow and just hit it and walk on in, you know? So it's, again, it's designed for the person who can't use the steps. But how many of us take advantage of it in many other ways and just makes our lives easier and more manageable? The other quote I wanted to make sure I put in here, because I always love it, in that we got to get kids to believe they can, is from Henry Ford, when he said, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Okay? So that's our job now, to reach those kids. All right. Assumption, 21st century classrooms are diverse. Anybody agree? All right, how do we see them as being more diverse in the 21st century? Those are ex-principals. Tell me how your schools were more diverse than they were 50 years ago.
Oh, a lot different cultures were presented.
Okay. Culturally diverse. Anything else?
Different languages,
A lot of
that's part
different.
of culture.
Yep. Languages. How about abilities? As we're doing more inclusion in classrooms, we're looking at abilities, disabilities, more diversity within classrooms that way. Okay, lots of different ways that we're seeing that. So how do we reach these diverse kids? In response to intervention, which was, we go on Maryland Learning Links, when Layla was pointing out the sidebar, one of the things was response to intervention. And just give me a show of hands, how many are familiar with that term? Okay, I'm going to go through it quickly then for others, but basically, this is a model that's used, and absolutely love it. It's used as when we look at behavior within schools, and we look at it, we use it with academics in schools. And essentially what it's saying is that if we take the students, all of the students, and we look at Tier 1, that's where 80% of our students will occur. So what we do up front should encompass those 80% of those students in the school, or in your case, if you're teaching, in your classroom. So behaviorally, we have schools with positive behavior intervention systems that are spread school-wide. So you don't have to be, every kid is getting rewarded for good behavior in some respect. It's just the culture of the school, it's the climate of the school. If there's other kids that need additional reminders or supports, then they might be up in the Tier 2 of the other 15%, or the Tier 3, which is about 5% of your students. And if we look at it academically, and again, we look at it within a classroom, we're saying that we want the instruction that we provide, that we design, that we plan, and that we implement, to be able to reach 80% of the students the first time out. So we don't have to like teach a lesson and then realize that, you know, this group didn't get it, but this group did, and then go back and do some differentiation. But we're going to do that up front. We're going to plan up front how we can reach all those students. And then maybe there's 15% of the students, the Tier 2, that are going to need to be either pulled out or given some additional supports or additional instruction. But it's still going, they're still going to be within the regular curriculum, the general curriculum. And then the Tier 3, the 5%, those are students with diagnosed disabilities that are truly on IEPs. So when we talk about universal design and you look at this model, you can see where it truly isn't a special ed initiative. It's a general ed initiative that keeps all these other kids out of special ed because they don't have to fail before we go and do some strategies and interventions. But we're doing them all up front, and then it's only if they don't respond to these evidence-based strategies and interventions that we're using typically in our classrooms, then we go and give them additional support. But what that really does is really help us truly identify the kids with disabilities who truly need more individualized instruction. Okay, being mindful. So the reason I go back to it's in our DNA to point out to kids and find their strengths and help them overcome their weaknesses through those strengths. And I'm pointing that out because we have some very successful people who weren't so successful at one time in their life or weren't seen as successful by the people in charge. So Michael Jordan, anybody know Michael Jordan's story?
He tried out for basketball and skipped off the team the first year.
He was. At what level, do you know?
9th grade, I think it was.
Yeah, high school.
Yeah.
Not even the big leagues, you know, but high school. Now, you know, any of you that are doing your adolescent development classes at this point or whatever, or any of us that had kids or taught middle school or high school, you know how fragile the psyche is of a 9th grader. And all of a sudden you're saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, you can't play basketball, you're not good enough." Well, obviously somebody saw something in Michael Jordan that coach didn't see, and he went on to be actually the ESPN, wait a minute, he is the ESPN greatest athlete in the 20th century that didn't make his high school basketball team. Dr. Seuss, anybody know his real name?
Theodore Geisel.
There you go, Theodore Geisel. The first book that he wrote, do you know that? It was And to Think I Saw It on Mulberry Street. Okay, the very first book. Anybody know how many publishers turned down that book before it got published? 27. 27 people said, it's not a very good book. I don't think anybody would like it. And then the 28th publisher saw something that the others didn't. And he's laughing all the way to the bank, right? With all the other millions of copies of books that he wrote. Good old Abe Lincoln. Anybody know about the struggles that he had? What are some of them?
Well, there were a number of times he ran for lesser offices. I mean, lost it pretty much every time.
6. Yeah, 6 times he lost when he went up for election. He had a nervous breakdown. He lost his job. I don't know, the list just goes on and on and on. But again, he kept kind of pushing through, or somebody was encouraging him. Somebody was saying, you can do this, you can do it, keep on trying. And then there's Coca-Cola. The story behind what am I drinking? Oh, we're on Pepsi here, so we should. But Coca-Cola, anybody know what happened there? The first year it came out, it only averaged 9 servings a day that they were selling. 9 servings, which was way below production costs. And they were just about to pull the plug on it. Somebody said, maybe that's when they added the Coke to the Coca-Cola, I don't know. But somebody said, let's try it again, let's hang in there, we can do something better. And again, it went on to sell billions and millions. And then there's Paul Potts. Does anybody know who Paul Potts is? Yes. Oh, hi, I didn't see you either.
He was somebody who auditioned on Britain's Got Talent, and when he first walked on stage, no one expected anything from him because he didn't look very professional. He kind of looked a little awkward.
Well, we're going to see him in just a second. So, right, he was on Britain's Got Talent in the first 2007, in the first series of Britain's Got Talent, and he walks on. And the thing I love about this is that those other examples we talked about, they failed, and then somebody helped them out, and they succeeded, and it's past history. And the beauty of YouTube is you can see the exact moment when Paul Potts gets a turnaround in the feedback that people give him. So when you're watching this, I want you to really watch closely on the people's faces that he's looking at as the audience and as the judges. And I want you to see what they're telling him in their body language, in their expressions, and see what his expression is, so you can see how he's thinking.
The next contestant, the world of showbiz seems a million miles away. It's Paul, a mobile phone salesman from South Wales.
By day, I sell mobile phones. My dream is to spend my life doing what I feel that I was born to do.
Paul, what are you here for today, Paul?
To sing opera. I've always wanted to sing as a career. Confidence has always been sort of like a difficult thing for me. I've always found it a little bit difficult to be completely confident in myself.
Okay, ready when you are. did that? I wasn't expecting that.
No, neither was I.
This was a complete breath of fresh air. I thought you were absolutely fantastic. You have an incredible voice. I think if you keep singing like that, you are going to be one of the favourites to win this whole competition.
I think that we've got a case of a little lump of coal here that is going to turn into a diamond.
Okay, moment of truth, young man. Here's absolutely yes. Amanda?
Yeah.
Paul? You are through to the next round.
What do you think? Okay, so we can say it's the law, or we can show something like this, to say that if you can, in your teaching, reach somebody and make them believe that they can do something, and they don't have to wait till they're 36 years old and work at Carphone Warehouse before they're discovered. And that's the power of teaching that is so amazing. So, did you see his face? You know, what do you think he was thinking, even when he finished and everybody was standing and giving him this big ovation? You know, what do you think?
He just still wasn't sure.
He wasn't.
He's
He
like-
wasn't.
He knows he has a beautiful voice, but do others approve?
Well, there were interviews afterwards with him. And he said, guess what? He was in special ed growing up. You know, and he said, for some reason, everybody always made fun of me. So he's not even sure why. And he said, I guess I just turned to music for consolation. That's what he found for himself. And he never had a singing lesson, ever. And but then when he, people said, well, wow, I guess you could sing as he became an adult. He did send tapes and videos and everything out, and I think they looked at him and then just didn't give him a next start. So the idea is, remember Paul Potts, I guess, kind of like, remember the Alamo. Remember Paul Potts when you're looking at those little creatures in front of you that may not look like typical mathematicians or typical writers, but, help them to see themselves as it is. Every time I've seen this since 2007, I cry every time, but my favorite thing is to watch your expressions when you see him. It's really powerful. Okay, mind-boggling. All right, so what we're going to do here is look at, there's this book called Brain Moles, and actually in Education Week, just last week, there were 2 articles. And one article said, experts call for teaching educators brain science. Okay, so I guess what they're saying is that things don't work. We try something and we think it works and that's good, but we don't really know why. So we need to know more about the brain and brain science so we really know why it's working. That gives us a really good handle then on what we're doing and why we're doing it. So this book, Brain Moles, is a really great way to learn some brain science. It's written by a molecular biologist, John Medina, and with a sense of humor. Now, how often do you get that combination, right? And the amazing thing about brain moles is he says there's 12 brain rules, or principles, and there's 12 chapters. So you can go through and read any chapter at a time. You don't have to go from beginning to end. You can pick it up, read one chapter, and put it down. And he says 12 principles for surviving and thinking at work, at home, and in school. So I always say it works great. The principles apply great to students, but they apply better to spouses. So it's really, there's an extra, reason to read this book. But we're going to give you a quick synopsis. Again, the beauty of YouTube, which would be a UDL principle. Basically, we're not just standing here saying this is the book and these are the chapters, but we're going to present it to you in just another way. So,
I could while away the hours, confirm with the flowers, consulting with the rain. My head I'd be scratching while my thoughts were busy hatching if I only had a brain. Well, I'd unravel every riddle for any individual in trouble and pain. With the thoughts I'd be thinking I could be another Lincoln if I only had a brain. Oh, shore. Oh, I could think of things I never thought before. And then I'd sit and think some more. Oh, I wouldn't be just enough, and my head all full of stuff and my heart all full of pain. I would dance and be merry, life would be a ding-a-dairy if I only had a brain. The ocean's near the shore. Oh, I could think of things I never thought before. And then I'd sit and think some more. Oh, I wouldn't be just enough, and my head all full of stuff and my heart all full of pain. I'd dance and be merry, life would be a ding-a-dairy if I only had a brain. And perhaps I deserve you and be even worthier of you if I only had a brain. Oh, I could tell you why the ocean's near the shore. Oh, I could think of things I never thought before. And then I'd sit. Oh, I wouldn't be just enough in my head.
Okay, so you just got a whole book in 30 seconds or a minute or whatever. So essentially, things you already knew. Nothing, there's probably no new information that female brains are wired differently than male brains. But, or exercise increases brain power. But what he does in this book is he'll give you examples so you remember, things that you're familiar with. And then he'll tell you get into a little bit of neurology and the reasons why. And then he follows up with something that you can remember again. So he wrote the book the way he's talking about the brain moves, which is a really fascinating thing. So for a quick read, I would either watch the video again or read the book. But I just want to give you an example. Chapter 3 is brains are not wired equally. Okay? So, boy, doesn't that make sense when all these little third graders are sitting in front of us and we're trying to teach the same content or curriculum to them because they are all in the same classroom. Okay? So then so we know that that's not the case. But for his example, so we remember it, or we can kind of remember and hang on to it, he uses Michael Jordan. Remember our ESPN greatest athlete of the 20th century? So I thought I'd pick that one since we had Michael there before. But he talks about Michael Jordan as the greatest basketball player. But then remember he went and played baseball for a while. So he quit basketball, retired from basketball, and went to play baseball. So you would think the greatest athlete of the 20th century could go out and play baseball without a problem, right? Wrong. But he tells us why in that. Because brains are wired differently, they're not wired equally. So essentially he talks about how Michael Jordan in 1994 went and he played for the Chicago Cubs for one amount of time. It wasn't even a season. And when he did that, he played the outfield. He was hitting .202 in his only season, the lowest of any regular player in the league that year. He simultaneously committed 11 errors in the outfield, also the league's worst. Okay? His performance was so poor he couldn't even qualify for a AAA farm team. Okay. At the very same time, in 1994, playing for the Seattle Mariners was Ken Griffey Jr. Ken Griffey Jr. was excelling in all the skills that Jordan was fumbling through. So and at the major league level, he was batting .300 for 7 years, over .300 for 7 years in a row. And he had hit 422 home runs. And he was also an outfield player. But he was known for his spectacular catches, and he was also known to float in the air. Well, float in the air, isn't that what Michael Jordan does in that Nike commercial? You know, so what's happening? What's going on? So he kind of arouses your curiosity in the beginning of this chapter, and then he goes and tells you why. He says, what was going on in the bodies of these two athletes? What is it about their brain's ability to communicate with their muscles and skeletons that made their talents so specialized? It has to do with how their brains were wired and how experiences alter that wiring. So bingo, you know, you're using two huge examples, two tremendous athletes, and showing how the wiring and the experience in one made him so fit for basketball, but not to carry over into baseball. So in the whole chapter, he goes in to explain why, and then kind of sums it up as what you do and learn in life physically rewires your brain. Okay, what you do and learn in life physically rewires your brain. That's powerful. Various regions of the brain develop at different rates for different people. No two people's brains store the same information in the same way and in the exact same place. And there's many ways to be intelligent that are not identified on IQ tests. So again, many things we knew, but just affirmed. And he finalizes it by, he says, you cannot change the fact that the human brain is individually wired. Every student's brain, every employee's brain, every customer's brain is wired differently. That's the brain rule. You can either accede to it or ignore it. The current system of education chooses the latter to our detriment. It needs to be torn down and newly envisioned in a Manhattan Project-sized commitment to individualizing instruction. He kind of feels strongly about it, could you tell? Then his last sentence, he finally concludes with, I bet many, now I put a couple words in here, I bet many teachers would discover that they have a great basketball player in their classroom, and they're asking him or her to play baseball. So just an example of what one chapter's like. Now, in your handout, you have a handout that says Brain Rules. It's 2 pages. And what it is strategies for classroom application. So what we did was just basically took each rule and just for fun, looked at the ways that in the past we differentiated instruction. Or, do you guys need me now? Just things that we did maybe a little differently for some students than for others, and plugged them under the corresponding brain rule. So what that tells us now is it didn't work by accident, or it didn't work because it was a unique idea. It worked because it connected to a brain rule. So, you know, we're becoming like rocket science here. So I just want to use just a couple, like 1 or 2, and again, point them out. Exercise boosts brain power. Okay, that's number 1 brain rule. It must mean something. All right, now, Marlene Cheney, back in 1985, didn't know this as a 3rd grade teacher when I was at Perry Hall Elementary School as a speech pathologist, but I was walking down the hall one day, and she's one of those 3rd grade teachers that you wanted to put every child that had any type of problem in her class, because they always learned. And she wasn't a special ed teacher, she was a teacher, that's all. And she loved children. Okay, so I walked past her room one day, and these kids are like hopping around the room, you know, they're all hopping in the line, and she's leading the line. I'm like, what is going on? So I stuck my head in, and I just watched, and they're going, drop the E and add I-N-G, drop the E and add I-N-G. And I'm like, Marlene, what are you doing? Well, actually, I asked her after it was over, I didn't interrupt her. And she says, all right, we're doing spelling, we're in spelling, and we're trying to teach them that spelling rule. And they kept writing bake, B-A-K-E-I-N-G, or rope, no, that wouldn't be it, hope, H-O-P-E-I-N-G, and they just wouldn't drop that E. So I thought, all right, let's see, how do we do this? The bunny hop, that's what we'll do. So they started the bunny hop, dropped the E and add I-N-G. Well, then what happened is when they went out on the playground, they thought that was so cool that they're out there on the playground mimicking and doing it. Now, how many kids practice their spelling rules out on the playground? But what she did was UDL 100 years ago, before it was popular, because something in her told her, if I get them up and moving, they'll learn what I need them to learn, and they'll get it. And they did. And they saw themselves as great spellers because they jumped it instead of writing the rule 10 times. Okay? So again, just another example. In rule number 2, the human brain evolved too. In that chapter, what they talk about there, he talks about a lot, is respect and relationships and safety and a safe environment. And again, we all know that that applies to a classroom. When kids feel safe, when they respect the teacher, when they know you care about them, then they learn for themselves, but they learn for you, right? They do it because. So again, these are just different strategies, different supports that are built in that follow each brain rule. I'm not going to take the time to go after all of them, but I would encourage you to copy this and give it to if you're teaching, give it to your students if it fits in. If your students take it and use it in your classroom, because it's now evidence-based strategies that are the reason why they work. And finally, in another article that I read in Education Week this week, the article was on Scientists Find Learning is Not Hardwired. There was an interview with the principal, and I thought she made this amazing statement that I wanted to read to you. She said, "A student's brain physically changes every day, and the way we teach either enhances or impairs it." Wow. Then she goes on to say, we have to ask ourselves, if we believe this, we have to ask ourselves as educators, what does our practice say about what we believe? So if we know that those malleable brains are changing, and what we're doing or not doing has such an effect on them every single day they're in our classroom, then again, this is just, it doesn't matter if it's the law or not. It's just what we want to do to reach people and to reach kids. Okay. And finally, well not finally, but right here, finally for me, because Layla takes over every year. What we've done in this slide is two things. We've looked at like a historical chronology of learning theory and how things kind of changed and how this all fits in. So if we go back to the 60s, again, I was a speech pathologist, and when we looked at language and language acquisition and language learning and then just learning information, the theory there by Helmer Michaelbus was that the experiential base is what had to happen. It's what started the learning process. So that children or babies or whatever experience things, and then from those experiences they began to have receptive knowledge or understanding. And based on that, after time and more experiences, they began to understand it so well that then they could express it or they could talk about it. So if you just look at it as a language learning, you can take a young child and you can say, point to the doggy or point to the bottle or where's your mommy or whatever, point to daddy, point to nose. And they'll do that, but they can't themselves label those things. And finally, as they have more and more experiences and as they mature, they can then tell you, this is my nose or there's mommy, and they begin to label. So if you take that very easy example, and you expand it to learning, it kind of follows the same thing. That children have experiences that we build on those experiences. They'll understand something before they can actually express it. And when they truly get to know it, then at a higher level, then they can express it and tell you about it. Okay, so that was kind of where that was. And then in the 80s, we had Carol Ann Tomlinson with differentiated instruction. And basically what she said was, if you can differentiate or change the environment, which would keep up with the experiences, right? The environment, and make sure that if children don't come in with experiences, you're going to build that knowledge before you build on new knowledge. The content, what it is you're teaching, and the process, how you're teaching it, and the product, how kids let you know what they know. That's where all the differentiated instruction came in. And so we went with that for 20 years. And on this purple handout, I think, is it still purple? Mm-hmm. Yes, okay. On the purple handout, again, I just pulled together things that you're probably already aware of or you may be hearing of in your classes as far as differentiated instruction and just different ways to change or present or differentiate the content, the curriculum, or the process in which you are presenting the curriculum. And then finally, when you want kids to tell you what they know or make a product, produce a learning product, ways to differentiate the product. Okay, so this stuff has all been around for 20 almost 30 years. 32 years, is that right? Yeah, long time, right? Okay, then we get into the 2000s and brain-based learning. And the thing that kind of catapulted us into this era is technology. Because now we can see the brain, we can map the brain, we can see when the neurons are firing. And that's essentially what it's all about. So what we have here is 3 areas of the brain that when we talk about universal design for learning, this area of the brain right there is what they call the recognition area. And they know that when kids are actually, when something is making sense, when they're taking in information, when they're recognizing what's going on, that area of the brain is going to fire up. Okay? If they're sitting there and they're watching something or listening to something, and this is like dead space, then guess what? It's not working. They're not learning. The strategic area of the brain is the area of the brain where they can be able to express what they know. Okay, so when they're telling you about something, or they're creating a product, or they're demonstrating something, the strategic area of the brain is going to light up. And the affective area of the brain is the part of the brain that's going to light up when people are engaged, when they're excited about something. So again, if I stood there and read or held up the Brain Rules book to you, maybe this area would light up a little bit, but not a whole lot. But hopefully watching the video, the YouTube video, those neurons were firing a little bit more. And that's what we want to get. We want to get those brains firing. So again, the affective network, multiple means of engagement when we talk about UDL is because we know we're firing that part of the brain. And that's the part of the brain that has to do with experiences, environment, and just excitement about learning. Multiple means of representation is the way that we want to present information so that the recognition network of the brain is firing. And then we want to give students multiple means of action and expression so they can tell us what they know in more than one way. Because maybe if we only give them one way, they're not good at that one way. Maybe if we say to kids, you know, write a paragraph about such and such, they're not good at it. So then that impedes them telling you what they know about whatever it is that they learned that day. But if we give them alternatives, if we let them act out something or create something to show what they know, again, that will provide us with more. And what better way than with technology today? And just as one more example of that, I would pull out my phone because when we all text message, you know, maybe to too much detriment, right? But when I was working in middle school, probably 15 years ago, we had a young lady with cerebral palsy, severe cerebral palsy. She's in a wheelchair. She could not talk because it affected her articulation and her muscles to that extent. So we had to get her this special piece of equipment, which was this big, cumbersome piece of equipment so that she could hook a device to her forehead and basically type out what she wanted to say. And built into that, which was so helpful for her, was a word prediction system. So when she would just start to type TH, the would pop up already, right? Or there, and she could choose from TH words. And as she went along, it would predict words. Well, guess what? My cell phone, if I text, has that option in my phone. So 15 years ago, I had to have a child have an IEP, have the assistive tech team to come in, get special permission to buy her this piece of equipment so that she could communicate. Now, it's on everybody's phone. That is UDL, okay? She needed it. We don't. It just makes our lives so much easier. So those are all the things that can help fire up those networks with the use of technology, as low-tech and high-tech, that we want to be talking about.
So we're going to start looking at, and you should have a handout, and we did it in color. You can't not do the principles in color. But this lists the 3 major principles of universal design for learning, and then the guiding principles under each of those main principles. And remember, it's a framework. It's a scientifically based framework for developing our instruction. So if we go to the next slide. There we go. What's that? What is that? Just yell it out.
Circle.
Circle, a ring, an oval. Anybody else?
Circle of influence within it. Circle of.
Oh, man.
You got it. What else?
That guy an A.
What else? A what?
Plate.
A plate. What else? An eye.
No, I'm saying it's interesting how it's many different things to different people.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, if I do this though, now what is it?
It's a plate.
I didn't change that drawing in any way, but I did give you some context. And someone did say plate. So someone could have gotten it right without any context at all. The rest of you were building on your experiences, whether they be today or previously. You were using your strengths and what you had and what you brought to the classroom to try to decide what that was. Your answers were equally valid based on the information I've given you. But when I place some context around it, when I situate your learning, now all of you would agree and we would all come to the same answer about what that is. And that's what when we talk about multiple means of representation, it's making sure that we provide that context that's meaningful to the students in our classroom to help them understand it is a plate. Because their answers are valid if we don't give them the structure by which to evaluate the material. So the first principle, and it's on your sheet, is multiple means of representation. It's providing options for perception. Have you ever had, and none of the professors in this room or on the camera will apply, but you ever had a professor where they just taught the entire, no lecture, no PowerPoint, nothing, it was just stand and deliver?
Yeah.
That might work for some of you. Did it work for all of you? Maybe not. Would it have been helpful to have some visuals to cue you as to what's going on? I know sometimes when I'm listening to a speech or something, and I've done a lot of web training now, if you don't have the visual to go with it, sometimes it's hard to make connections to what's being said because it's only coming to me auditorily, and I'm not seeing a visual connection to it. And remember, Brain Rule says we are visual learners. And so we actually now, it used to be, as we study the brain, it used to be that pictures kind of supplemented the text. What they're finding now in the brain scans is that really the text supplements the pictures. Kids, when they read text, when they're reading books, they're looking at the photographs for the information. And the text is just a support. It's an added piece of supplemental information, which is a total change and shift from how we used to look at textbooks and pictures and information. So if we don't give our students the visuals to help make the connection to it, we only give them text or we only say it to them verbally, we're going to lose a lot of our kids in that scenario. If we do all three, we'll cover a lot of people, a lot of kids. Language, mathematical, I may go into a pre-cal class and say, what are they talking about? I was talking to my brother about a math problem. He starts talking about cosine and if and only if and all these things. And I remember hearing about way back when, but they don't make any sense to me whatsoever. I turned off after about 5 minutes and I'm nodding my head and watching the television as he keeps talking. But giving him, if he, not that I want that foundational knowledge, but if he'd give me some foundation and some vocabulary to work with, I would have been better and more receptive to the conversation. It's kind of funny, but a lot of our kids think of us the same way. I taught an introduction to special ed class to an MAT group, and I started off with, because I thought these were graduate students, IEP, MSDE, and I started throwing out all these acronyms, and finally one guy in the back raised his hand and said, I don't know what you just said. I don't have a clue. What are you talking about? And he was absolutely right. He didn't have the context by which to understand, or the vocabulary to have that conversation with. So those are just a couple of examples. You can see others. What we'd like, you've been listening to us for a long time, so what I'd like you to do is, we were going to break it up, faculty, or break the room. Let's break the room about here. So you guys work in a group, and this side is a group. And think about ways that you could apply multiple means of representation in a K-12 classroom. And then this side of the room, think about ways you could apply multiple means of representation in a college classroom. And we'll walk around. If you have questions, let us know. So the back side of the room is going to talk about K-12, ways that you could, examples of what multiple means of representation might look like in a K-12 classroom. Examples of what multiple means of representation might look like in a college classroom. Any questions?
I think the problem with the whole choosing our project thing is that they need a defined rubric. So that, like, I mean, if you choose your own project and say you want to do it.
You don't have to decide on
Right,
it.
I mean,
I'm gonna do Chinese
regardless,
fire
they have to
drills.
have a rubric for it.
Literally, every
They
10
can't
minutes,
just
I'm
say,
gonna have my kids take, I'm gonna tell them when they come to class, don't bring out, but just take out papers and pencils, and every 10 minutes, I'm gonna make them switch seats. Just switch seats. Take your name tag in your seat. That way you get up and you move, but you're getting the same information. You know, everything has to.
Exactly, but they can do it.
Right, we're gonna come back together. I hear great ideas. I was gonna say, yeah, all day long. Sorry, my Texas came out. You all can talk all day long. Let's start with the group that did the college classroom. What were some ideas that you had?
We said like for, final projects or any type of assignment or activity that we have, that the students can use any format that they want to the best that they can. So say someone, wants to do a skit, it's very theatrical, and that's the best way that they can communicate what they have learned. Or if someone wants to do it in an essay, and maybe that's their way of expressing or communicating their ideas, so that there's a rubric and they meet all those expectations still, but they do it in a variety of ways.
Absolutely. And I like that you all talked about the rubric, because there still has to be criteria. Everybody who does it has to meet that criteria, but you can meet that criteria with a skit or a brochure or a movie or a video or anything that you are good at doing. So great. You guys.
We thought of, just because a few of us here at this table are history majors, and we were thinking about in history classes, a lot of times you get a lesson or a unit, you're studying that lesson or unit, and then you have the assessment at the end. And we thought based upon a rubric we could do where part of it might be a written assignment, the other part might be an oral portion, and then maybe they could do a fun activity like a comic strip or, something tactile where they can make a model, whatever they wanted to do. But what it does is it gives that student that maybe they're not a great writer, but they're much better verbally conveying what they know and their thoughts. And if everybody's doing the same thing, I as a teacher, because I've dealt with these students, will know, I know the student's probably a better writer than a speaker because they might be a little more shy. But at the same time, it gives them 3 different avenues to convey the same information that hopefully everybody's learning. And it doesn't mean that I weigh one part heavier than the other. It just means I need to make sure that what's required, what I taught, has been learned from that student, and it gives them 3 shots at the same opportunity to prove that they have it.
Good. And thinking about that diversity in our learners. And you make a great point, if we're studying history and the standards, give me a history standard that you evaluate.
Well, we definitely have to learn like the Reconstruction period. We learn that part.
So you're learning about the Reconstruction period. And you ask students to say, a typical assignment might be to write an essay about the Reconstruction period. If the child knows everything about it, they're really good at it, but they're not a great writer, what are you measuring with that assessment? Their ability to, their knowledge of the content standard, or their ability to write? And you made a good point. We're not getting, it's not only is it not a fair assessment, it's not an accurate assessment, because I'm not walking away as a teacher knowing what that student knows about the Reconstruction period. I'm walking away looking at the student's writing ability. Is that a problem with the student or the curriculum or the assessment that we've developed? That's in UDL we talk about barriers, and to me that's a barrier, because that has put a barrier in front of that student where that student's not able to show us what they know. Same as in the college classroom. If professors keep giving you multiple choice tests and that's not the way that you perform best, and it always happens. You take the test, you walk out, you can say everything to me, but when it gets to sitting down and filling it out, you can't. That's not a problem within our children or our students. That is a problem within our curriculum. That's a barrier that is in that curriculum. And Universal Design for Learning seeks to remove those barriers by providing choices like you were talking about, or options like you all were talking about. Any other thoughts or ideas?
I wanted to mention something about the professors, from the professor's standpoint. One of the things, and Keith and I were talking about this, I think it's real important to remember to put the students in your class in different types of action situations or engagement situations, or even asking them questions. For example, I see some of my old students, and they're asking them questions that produce anxiety, right? And explaining it to them after you do it. So that's one way to do it. But if I ask you if you know the answer, to raise your hand. Those simple kind of things. We're making sure they're in groups, in different size groups. Those different size groups will give you different results, and then explain that to them, and then have them do oral presentations. with a rubric and have them walk through that and work it out. So I think as a college professor, my focus, I think, is to put them in a variety of situations to give them tools.
Absolutely, absolutely. And modeling what we want them to be able to do.
Only the history example, because I remember when I was in middle school and I was working with some students, and this one boy was he just wanted to do well so badly, but he had difficulty writing and remembering everything, particularly in social studies. And I saw him one day and he said, "I'm so excited, we're going to have the test on Friday, I think I'm going to ace it." I said, "Really? That's great. What?" He says, "It's the states and the capitals." And I had to remember, I memorized it in 5th grade, so I don't have to learn a whole lot about it, but I think I could get it, and I think I'm going to know it. He was like so pumped that he was going to get 100 on his test. Well, then I saw him a couple days later. He actually found me when I was on bus duty, and and he was like, really upset. And I said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "I'm going to fail that test." And I said, "Wait a minute, you just were going to get an ace. You were going to ace it a couple of days ago." He said, "The teacher said that spelling counts." Well, here was this. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with it? Is it fair?
No.
Is it accurate? No. So I even went to the teacher and said, maybe he's a really bad speller, but he's really trying. Could he write down how he thinks it's spelled so you know what he was intending, and maybe go to an atlas and then copy it the right way? Nope, couldn't do that. It wouldn't be fair. So I think the point here is we have to make sure that we're really, as we're all saying, make sure that when we ask for a product, that it's valid in what it is that we want to know. Do they want to know the states or capitals, or do they want to know 100 now spelling words that this child had?
I have a question. Understanding that we're all also writing and reading teachers, how do we help the students understand their weaknesses without discouraging them from what they're good at? Like being realistic about the fact that they can't write or can't spell, but without destroying them.
You bring up a great point, because we are all teachers of reading and writing, absolutely. And so it's not that we don't give them opportunities to practice that, but we're selective about when are we evaluating them. If it's a spelling test, then by all means spelling counts, and that's what we're going to focus on there. But if it's social studies and it's about the capitals and the states, then we evaluate it there. So it's being purposeful about, we have to evaluate students on all content areas and on all the standards, but thinking about what am I really evaluating here? And that's a hard thing to do, even for college professors, because we think everything we say and teach is very important. It's critical information, and you better have it when you walk out of our classroom. But we have to kind of step back and say, what is the big idea and the critical information, the enduring understandings of this particular activity lesson that I'm trying to accomplish? And then I'm going to make sure that I cover all my bases and cover that writing, even though we're going to practice writing and we'll do activities, but they're non-threatening, in that they're not going to count against that student in grading or assessment of things in this context, but it might do it in another context. So we're giving kind of brief examples, but absolutely you want to be sure that you have a lot of balance and cover a lot of ground in your instructional practices.
Right, I was going to say, making sure that we teach them, because if we're in a math class and we want them to write how they got to an answer, we have to teach them to write that in that format, in that way. We're in a science class and we want them to write about the result of a hypothesis. Again, that's a little bit different writing style, so if we teach it, we model it. You were saying model the art project before they do it. So if we teach it, we model it, we give them supports and scaffold it, and then expect them to do it. And they're going to be on different levels. Again, that's the 21st century classes are diverse classrooms. Some students aren't going to need that direct instruction. They'll already know how to write like a mathematician or a scientist, but other kids will. So if we just build that in, and our expectations are there, but we're constantly raising the bar, but making it doable for them, that's the key.
Good point.
Yeah.
We move into the last one very quickly.
We're getting on the slide.
What emotion comes to mind when you see that photo?
Excitement.
Excitement?
Yeah.
Times Square. Happy? Excited? Anybody not happy or excited? Anybody else? Anybody else? Vibrant. Busy.
Muggers.
That's not an emotion.
she's modeling very well the fact that what, I mean, and when we were talking about this, she's like, I love New York City. She's like, did it once, no. She even said this photo kind of even made her think she might like it again, but not really.
Right, it was the phantom picture.
Yeah, the phantom picture. But the point behind this slide is we will use things with our kids and we'll say everybody is going to love New York City. No doubt about it. I just lost one student over there because the first thing that came to her mind is, I do not like it. There's traffic, there are muggers, there are no horses. And so, I'm checked out. It's not for me. We'll use sometimes a picture of Disney World. You would think, who in their right mind wouldn't love Mickey Mouse in Disney World? There are a lot of people who don't like Disney World. So the point though being, don't ever make assumptions and assume that what you're using to engage your students, to draw them in, your hook, your anticipatory set, whatever you want to call it, whatever you're doing to kind of bring them into that lesson and then sustain their effort throughout the lesson, don't make any assumptions about the fact that what's engaging to you and to 95% of your students is going to be engaging to 100% of your students. So by being flexible and offering choices in the ways that we engage our learners, we make sure that we don't lose the 1, 2, 3 people who don't like New York City or who aren't engaged or excited about Disney World or whatever that case may be. So if we go to that other, our multiple means of engagement, how many of you like to have some choices, some input into the work that you do? Good. So do your students. They like to have a choice. They like to have some options. I went in, my son was doing an art project one time, and I did the good thing and volunteered. I didn't realize they were doing the Mother's Day presents though, so the teacher was very upset that I was in there volunteering during the Mother's Day thing. But anyways, I saw there was a helper going around and the students were cutting things out and pasting their hands. It was one of those poems, my handprint. And I noticed that she was going around, she's like, no, it's got to go on this side, this direction, it's got to look like this. And I thought, what mother's going to care if the hand's upside down or inside? And that's going to tell me about my learner, my child. And those kids were not having a good time making these cards because they were being pressured to make the cards all look the same. And they lost the whole purpose of the activity, which is to create something fun for your parent, for your mom. And so that always stuck in my mind as a great example of how you lose kids in what should be a really fun activity by restricting it. So allowing choice, allowing autonomy, allow them to think outside of the box. If you give your students opportunities to come up with things, both for action and expression and for engagement, they will blow your mind every time. They will come up with something that is way beyond your wildest imagination. And it will be fantastic work. They will impress you beyond belief. And so when we think about engagement, though, think about keeping those kids engaged. Think about ways that you can do that. We're going to move on because we only have a few minutes. But
do that.
You
want to just do the handout?
Yeah, there is a handout, the college handout. This is for our college professors.
Or for our students to give to their college professor.
Our names are not on them, right?
That's right. No. This is where the links are, though, on that last page.
Yes, there are links on the very back. And you know, it's funny, just planning ahead, having your assignments up early for college professors is a huge support to students so that they have extra time to ask questions and do those kinds of things. But on the back, there's the Center for Universal Design and Education, the Do It Center. It's very helpful. They have a whole section on college, post-secondary education and UDL. CAST, the Center for Applied Special Technology, CAST, they're the pioneers in universal design for learning. Anything and everything you want to know about UDL is on the CAST website, or there's a link to somewhere else that will have it for you.
This actually came from the CAST website.
Do it. But the link to do it came from the CAST website.
Okay,
it all goes back to CAST. The National Center on Universal Design for Learning has great resources for K-12 and college. A Route for Every Learner is that report that Maryland put out. If you only read one thing, read that report, because they pulled a lot of great information from CAST and from the other resources, and it's what you're going to be if you stay in the state of Maryland, what you're going to be looking to do. And if you don't stay in the state of Maryland, other states are now making progress and looking to Maryland as a model for what UDL will look like in their states. So, and then the periodic table of visualization methods, we don't have time to look at it. Look at that one, it's fun. It has every kind of visual representation you could imagine, from story maps to, I learned swimming lane diagrams to all kinds of different types of visual ways to represent information for your students. And it's set up like a periodic chart. So
When I saw this, I laughed because in 1990, I was trying to think of the year, when I was a speech pathologist, I was working with a grant. And 2 days a week, I would go around to schools with another special ed teacher, and we did differentiation presentations. And the handout that we gave, we actually adjusted the one from Montgomery County, and it was called Reasonable Classroom Accommodations. And guess what? It was exactly the stuff that was on this Reasonable Classroom Accommodations for K-12 teachers back in 1990. And at that time, the teachers were saying, we can't do that, that's not fair, we couldn't do that. And so I think these are regular practices now in K-12, pre-K-12 classrooms. But I love that they finally made it to the university level, that it is fair, that it is okay, that it's ways that we can tap knowledge and be better teachers and look at teaching and learning as our goal. And so, like I said, if you're a student, it's like put it in your teacher's mailbox, anonymously or something like that. Good stuff, because it's just good teaching techniques. It's nothing magical, just good stuff.
And so in summation, it's and I don't have the quotes over there somewhere, but CAS talks about universal design for learning as a way to make instruction better for every student in the classroom. It's about making teaching and learning more effective and better. It's not about changing the curriculum. It's about changing the way we approach it and providing students with the opportunity. And all students, not just students with disabilities, everyone in that
So it's
classroom.
fixing the teaching, not the kids.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because a lot of what kids struggle with is not what they know, it's how we give it to them, how we ask them to tell us what they know.
And so we end with the final empowerment, and this is a poem, I guess, by Goethe, who was a German poet, philosopher, writer. And I've had this on my door of my office for wherever office I've been in for about 20 years. And I used to have one copy, and sometimes I'd go by and somebody would like it and take it, which I thought was great. So now if you went past my office door, there's like 10 copies paperclip, so anybody can take it. But we gave you all a copy too, and because it kind of says it all. I've come to the frightening conclusion that I am the decisive element. It is my personal approach that creates the climate. It is my daily mood that makes the weather. I possess tremendous power to make life miserable or joyous. I can be a tool of torture or an instrument of inspiration. I can humiliate or humor, hurt or heal. In all situations, it is my response that decides whether a crisis is escalated or de-escalated, and a person is humanized or dehumanized. And this is the hardest part right here, but I think the most important part. If we treat people as they are, we make them worse. If we treat people as they ought to be, we help them become what they are capable of becoming. And I think that that's what we're supposed to do. That's why we're here, to teach. I'm not sure if we find teaching or teaching finds us, but that's what we do, and that's how we do it. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much.
If you have any questions.
Okay. Thank you again for coming out. Those of you that came voluntarily or involuntarily, thank you for joining us today.